Kia ora, and a warm welcome to this session in the Let's Talk About Library Space Design series. Kia ora is a greeting in Te Reo Māori, the Māori language, and it's often used here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, to say hello and acknowledge one another. I'm delighted to be joined today by Andrew Harrison and Graeme Finlay from Warren and Mahoney, who co-authored the Future Libraries Report, a study drawing on conversations with 32 academic libraries around the world. Today, we'll explore what they discovered and reflect on what this means and how we design and use library space in the years ahead. So, Andrew, Graeme, let's start with the report itself. You both worked extensively on campus master plans and academic buildings internationally. So what prompted you to undertake this research and what kind of impact were you hoping it would have, particularly on academic libraries and their leadership?
Okay, I'll start off, Andrew, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
First, I should explain who we are, I think a little bit of background. So Warren and Mahoney, we're one of the largest architectural practice in the Australasian region. Although we're based in Australia and New Zealand, our work stretches from the Pacific coast of Asia, the Pacific coast of America. A large part of our work over the last 20 years or so has been in the tertiary education sector. Although we also have specialists in libraries and have designed about 15 or so quite innovative community libraries. We've remodeled the New Zealand National Library, and just very recently we completed a new building for the New Zealand National Archives. And it was the crossover in this work that led us to this study. We've worked on many university campuses, on master plans and major buildings, and we saw what we thought was a common blind spot in the thinking of property teams and executive teams. What we were seeing is commonalities in university strategies. But few of the teams we were dealing with were making a link between the organizational strategy, what the university wanted to achieve, and the services that the library was able to provide. And obviously that sort of thinking is really critical in any master planning and large-scale remodeling of a university campus. So this research is really a first step in bridging that gap. And essentially, our interest was understanding the role that the future library might take in delivering a university's goals in terms of these common themes, such as student experience, student success, changing demographics of the users of universities, engagement with industry, community outreach, digitization, and AI, and all of those things we keep hearing about at universities. So we're very lucky as a practice to link up with Andrew, who has been working internationally for many, many years as a strategist. Our first psychologist that we have ever employed as an architecture practice, but we linked up, and I'll just hand over to Andrew now.
Thank you. Yes, it was a delight to work on this project. I've been working on library projects, as Graeme was saying, for 20 plus years in very diverse parts of the world, including sort of Central Asia, India, Africa. But in all the conversations I had with library staff and academics around the world, there was just this amazing feeling that this was a moment of change of time where the library has reinventing itself yet again to have this pivotal role on campus, bringing together space, technology, and services in different ways. So the study was an opportunity to really go into more depth and conversations with the sort of 32 leadership teams. And from that came the two reports that we completed. The main report, which is a bit of a chunky report, was really trying to distill good practice from across all the different universities we spoke to both inspire, but also provide a sense of solidarity that the same issues were coming up in very diverse institutions, very diverse countries. But then, as Graeme was saying, the executive summary had a different focus, which was really about that strategic connection between the library and the university's institutional goals. Because we found in the discussions that one of the big frustrations that many of the library teams we had is that people didn't know what they did, that the reduction in collections didn't mean a reduction in role. So how do we help the libraries explain that bigger picture to their university leadership teams?
Yeah, so I mean that really resonated with me as well when I read it, and that theme, that major theme in the report, is that shift from a collection centric to a connection centric service. So perhaps can you share some examples of how academic libraries are actually putting that shift into practice?
Absolutely. What's been we'll talk about it, I'm sure, later on as well. But one of the big issues that all libraries are exploring is the value of the collections, and how the collections and the very valuable real estate that those collections are sort of sitting on can best enhance the student experience and provide, that sort of space for change. So what we found was that many, if not just most of the universities we spoke to, apart from the legal deposit libraries, were actively engaging and reviewing their collections, and a reduction of 50% was quite common. But what that provides is the opportunity to reinvent that space and provide a whole range of other facilities that really enhance the role of the library within the wider campus. So we saw all sorts of examples of spaces like digital scholarship centres, spaces for First Nations, maker spaces, student lounges, postgraduate lounge. All of these spaces are only possible within the existing containers if that collection is rationalised. And that really starts to bring different populations and different services, different ways of doing things within the library. So very much about connections. But then I think the other sort of slight corollary to that is that those connections are not limited to the building. We also saw a number of the universities we spoke to breaking out of the boundaries of the library and providing library services and curated spaces across the campus. And I think that's a really encouraging, a really positive trend. But then also leads to some challenges around management, around budgets, and around staffing. But it is very much about people to people rather than people to books.
Mm-hmm.
There's also quite a strong strategic perspective to this shift. So it's not really only about the collection and the need for the collection and the size of the collection. If you take it back to the university strategy level, there's a strong emphasis in almost every university we talked with about enhancing the student experience and improving student success. So retention rates and of the students. So what we saw were libraries bridging that gap and creating a solution for that, and possibly not asked to do so, but actually filling the gap, creating a community, a home for a home. And we heard those words quite a lot, that the library was a place where students could feel part of a community, could connect with friends, and also where students could be if their living conditions were poor, where they might prefer to be. And so really creating spaces where students would want to spend their time on campus working alone or together with friends. And so enhancing that student experience. And on the other side, we saw a clear trend of libraries becoming a hub for learning support and student support services. And these are sometimes areas which are provided by different departments in different parts of the campus. But there's a legibility that comes with bringing these to the library, creating in many instances a one-stop shop for the student during their life on campus, and therefore helping them be successful, helping them stay at the university and succeed in their courses. So I think there's these elements that the library can provide with this space that is being provided. So we're kind of in a lucky coincidence, really.
So that shift does open up some new possibilities, but I think it also opens up some challenges, some big ones. So what cultural or practical challenges do libraries face in reducing their physical collections? And also how can special collections play a more central role in the reimagined library?
Yeah, that reduction of collections is never an easy process, and it is a very cultural process, and one that has to be handled sensitively. And we found that the universities that had the best success was where they worked very collaboratively with the academic staff and with students as well, to really explore where the value comes from the collection. how it's being used, what the use rates of the collection is, because many of the libraries we spoke to have a lot of stock that hasn't been accessed for many, many years. So what do you do with that? And it's through those discussions with academics, you can come up with an appropriate blended strategy for what stays on the shelves in the library, what could be near the library in off-site stores within the campus, what could be put hundreds of miles away if it's still valued, but also what could be shared between institutions. Does every university in a region need to have every copy of every book? Perhaps we could work together and blend that delivery strategy. But it is important to note that across all the universities we spoke to, it was one of the consistent themes was how much students value having books around them in the library as part of the library experience, even if they're not actually accessing them that often. A number of the libraries we spoke to said students take out less than one book per year, actually remove it from the library, but they like to have them around. So how can you use those books to provide that scholarly feeling that helps students to feel that they should be studying? But also, how do you use it to create destinations or neighborhoods with particular characters within the library? And books have that useful acoustic baffle property where they can help to deaden noise so that students can work quietly. But it is just about that serendipity of walking into a space and finding things that you didn't know were going to be there. So that's all really important. But, I suppose one of my areas of special interest is special collection. I fundamentally believe that as the general collection becomes less obvious in many libraries, the role of the special collections is becoming more and more critical. And quite a few of the libraries we spoke to were rethinking their special collection strategy to move the books, the special collections reading rooms, the treasure trove of the library down to much more public spaces, much more accessible spaces, and to connect them to the surrounding community through events and exhibitions, all of these things. So to make it a real symbol of scholarship within the institution. But even more interesting at this particular moment in time, we have these two trends coming together with the rise of digital scholarship and the notion that the special collections are actually an untapped wealth in terms of using digital scholarship techniques to review artifacts, to review volumes or collections in entirely different ways. So you're suddenly seeing the latest digital scholarship going together with medieval manuscripts in a very interesting way. So that's new spaces, new services, new connections, both within the university but with the wider community. But Graeme, what would you like to add to that?
And so there is an opportunity when thinking about special collections to use the process to rationalize. What are the special parts of the special collection which actively align with the mission of the university or the aims or the study that's going on within the university, and which parts of it were perhaps bequeathed to the university but have less relevance, and perhaps through a connection with the local museum might access more people and be presented and get more visibility and be more valued elsewhere. So I think there's an opportunity to look at special connections in those ways. I totally agree with Andrew in terms of this trend we saw to bring parts of the special collection out to the center of the library. And Andrew, you often use the phrase "a place of wonder."
It's a lovely phrase, a place of wonder. But something that you've both touched on is something that we're grappling with, and that is as our libraries become more collaborative and multifunctional, how do we also protect what many still value, which is that quiet, contemplative study space? What have you seen work to balance these sometimes competing needs?
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting subject. For the last 20 years or so, people have been introducing more collaborative study space, noisy spaces, places where people will collaborate and work together. And yet what we were hearing from every library was there was a demand for more quiet spaces. And there's a number of reasons for that. on the one hand, it appears to be that more students are accessing their lectures or seminars within the library space. Therefore, they're either talking to the screen or they're being disturbed by people in the background who are talking too loudly. So there is a shift at the moment, and a need for a greater sort of amount of different types of spaces. So we've been using the term learning landscape to really try and visualize this idea of lots of different types of study space, from the collaborative, the noisy, to the quieter but working together, to the very, very quiet spaces. So you have a whole variety. And we did hear an awful lot of libraries we're going beyond their boundaries and looking towards spaces outside on balconies and outside spaces, and seeing that with that landscape of different study spaces, there was an opportunity to really literally use the landscape. So the design of these spaces is probably one of the most exciting design opportunities for an architect. The challenge, of course, is creating spaces that meet the needs of the students and the different activities that they need to allow for, but also in a way that the students love. So they want to use those spaces because they choose to be in the library. So creating spaces that they want to use and want to stay in. So that's my comment. The only one other thing I would say before I hand over to Andrew is we did see another trend, which was, and we'd known it was happening, and I think everyone knows it's been happening, but on almost every campus, there's been a growing spill of new student study spaces in every new building, and everyone's shoving a new study space. We found that very few universities actually were master planning that and understanding if they had the right types of spaces in the right locations and they were meeting the needs. We also found that there was a great difference in quality of these spaces across a campus. And there was a number of discussions with a number of universities about perhaps the university library should be organizing and managing that. And I know that varied from in terms of scale of university and the like, but it did seem to be a missing piece in a lot of the university's planning. But I'll hand over to Andrew now.
Yeah, thanks. Just to add to that slightly, is one of the challenges and one of the exciting things from a design point of view with libraries is that the demand changes over time. The way the spaces are used, or the types of spaces that are sought after at the beginning of the academic year, is very different to how those spaces are needed a week before exams, sort of thing. So how do you use the furniture, the design, the settings, the staff, everyone to manage that change over the academic year? So that's one interesting set of design challenges. The other is more broadly, how do you create these neighborhoods? I've talked about neighborhoods before that sort of signal a different set of behaviors and sort of self-police. So I've been talking more and more when we've been trying to explore this with the universities around the notion of bringing back the concept of the reading room. But reading rooms with very different characters, where it's very clear where it's a silent study type reading room versus an active learning buzzy type place. So it's using that design to signify a set of behaviors going forward. I think there's loads of opportunity there.
Yeah. So I think this kind of leads nicely to a discussion around equity and inclusion more broadly as well. So how can libraries design better to, and support the increasingly diverse communities that universities now serve? Whether that's Indigenous students or parents or neurodivergent learners or others. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. It was a key theme that came up with virtually every institution every library trying to find a way through this. But I think the key shift that's happened and is continuing to happen is a move away from providing identified spaces for like, do you remember when we used to have an assisted technologies room in the library, or and even a neurodiverse room? It's labeling a group of people to say this room is for you. Whereas we were seeing quite a few universities say, well, actually, if we follow this learning landscape approach, let's provide diverse spaces that are inclusive for all, but have particular focus. So it may be in a First Nations type space, but it's about welcoming everyone in to understand and explore First Nations issues. It's providing spaces with sensory control for anyone to use. It's providing that much more open and inclusive view of all the spaces rather than identifying, and using design in a non-tokenistic way, to fundamentally think through what are the values, what's the ethos that you're trying to get that library to embody. Graeme, you want to add to that?
Yeah, Will, from a design perspective, what we're seeing, and I'm sort of lifting up a level into sort of general architecture, we're seeing is a move away from a bland sort of international style of spaces to designs which are much more reflective of their locality, their culture and their place, which is a really exciting move. I mean, there is no reason that a university library in Aberdeen should look exactly the same as one in Barcelona and one in San Diego and one in Auckland and one in Sydney. They should be reflective of where they're from. And so what's occurring in New Zealand and what's been occurring in Australia now and is occurring in Canada as well, we're seeing, is this engagement with the Indigenous population to understand their story and provide spaces that they'll be more comfortable in, and break down some of those cultural barriers, but also to start to tell the story. It's an area where we've begun to specialize as a design firm, and there's some wonderful examples. Hopefully we'll be able to put some of those images in. In its most basic form, what we've seen and heard is the introduction of Indigenous language and seeing the naming of spaces and the naming of and artwork. But when you go beyond that, then we're seeing in a number of universities the creation of Indigenous spaces where the local cultures are represented and people can feel and learn about those cultures and feel more comfortable. But when it's embraced more fully, it can develop into really beautiful design languages for buildings and the spaces inside. And while this has evolved, from post-colonial Indigenous working with Indigenous groups, it's actually relevant to all parts of the world. A really exciting space for architecture.
So this is a slightly different, slightly segueing away, but I think for many of us in the library world, something we have to grapple with, and that's many of us are working within these existing, sometimes iconic buildings. And so what is your advice for retrofitting or reimagining these legacy spaces to support this future-focused use?
First task in working with a legacy building on a campus is to strip away the years of additional things that have been added, rooms that have been placed, signage and everything, and just strip the thing back and understand what it was and what it is and what its potential is. Once you do that, you can often find that the spaces are actually really beautiful and really well conceived. But it's the changes that have been made in the last 40, 50, 100 years that make it unusable. So that's the starting point. And in some ways, these legacy buildings can have an advantage. They've got a character, they've got a history, they've got a patina. So they have something that a new building inherently doesn't have to start with. So I don't think we should see them as problems. I think we should look at them first as an opportunity. Often they're quite large buildings, high floor to floor and big spans, and that means that they can successfully be replanned. Obviously, it doesn't work for the very old ones that you might find in Europe. But usually there's an opportunity to replan those buildings quite well. However, there are always challenges. So we've had a number of instances where library towers, They try and remove the stacks from the library towers, which is great, and try and put people back in, which is great. But unfortunately, the stairs and the fire systems and the escape systems are only designed for a certain number of people. So there can be a whole load of hidden challenges. But that said, it's a challenge that most libraries have. And usually the bones of the library buildings, the 1950s, 1940s, 1930s buildings, were actually quite good when you strip them back. I'll hand over to Andrew now.
Yeah.
Rather than...
Yeah, I think that understanding the building is one of the key starting points for any sort of library reimagining project. And the way we've often thought about it is it's sort of supply and demand. You've got to understand the two things in parallel. It's what's the key thing is really what's the future vision for the library? How does it fit in with the institutional goals? What do you want that future library to be able to deliver? But think in a long-term future, future-proofing point of view. It's not just what you want to achieve today. It's how can we create a loose fit container that can continue to change without continual, messing around in the future. So get that vision right, and then look at the building infrastructure, the supply side, and then bring the two together, matching the supply and the demand to create the sort of outline vision for how you will achieve the new library. So there's a lot of user consultation, wider academic consultation, community consultation to ensure that future vision isn't just the vision for the current day, the current university. It's what will last for another 50, 100 plus years.
So how about we flip this on its head and say this time, if you had a blank slate designing an academic library from scratch, what are the top 3 things you'd make sure you included, and what would you leave out?
That's a tricky one. I think I'd like to just start by going back to that, what we've just been talking about, because it's really, before you even get inside the front door of the library, it's what's the role of that library going to be in the future, and how does it fit within the broader campus? Is it an island by itself, or is it part of a network? And that was why one of the sort of summary elements of the study was this notion of these 5 library models, which I'm sure we can insert in here to help people understand. But the notion that some universities, the library as an island is a desired outcome. Other times it is a network of spaces, or it's a sort of much more focused range of limited activities. So you've got to understand that before you decide what goes on inside the building. Once you get inside the building, it's about creating inclusive spaces, making sure that the library isn't full of microaggressions, isn't full of barriers to stop not just the university community, but the wider community from coming in and embracing and using the space and getting access to the expertise. And it's so, libraries can be so scary to so many people. So how do we create spaces that welcome everyone? And
I would say one thing we did hear again quite a lot is it's really hard trying to be everything for everyone. And all the libraries were suffering from this challenge. So one of the things I would say, in a world where finance is tight, where universities are asking everyone to contract on space, it's really important to decide what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And that's where the alignment with the strategic plan comes back to say, what is the highest and best purpose that this library must achieve? Because I think a lot of libraries are delivering services for historic reasons, because that's what they've always done, whereas the world has changed and libraries are changing. And that was one of the reasons we put these 5 theoretical models for the future library together, because what we wanted to show is there is a range, and it streams on the one hand from the traditional island. It's a central library, does everything on its own, it's there, to this idea that the library is together with a whole load of other student facilities, is a hub, and every student goes there and spends part of its day there, and it's where they meet all their friends. To the library controls all of the teaching spaces and has outreach places in every department. to the other extreme, where the library is just a clinic, where you literally go, you get your book, or you speak to someone and you leave, and you don't sit down other than for your meeting. Or what we're also hearing is the library is a metaverse. So maybe the library doesn't have a building at all. No library that we came across was a perfect model of any of them, but all of them were trying to find their place within those different models. And I'd say that would probably be it. It's a really exciting time for libraries, because I think Andrew and I truly believe they're going to evolve in a very significant way over the next period. And I think they're going to be fundamentally more important than they were on the campus rather than less. And I think there's a great misunderstanding in most universities about that.
Andrew, Graeme, thank you both for sharing your insights. I think that's a marvellous place to finish on. What's clear is that libraries are no longer just about what they hold, but about what they enable: connection, collaboration, well-being, and innovation. So this conversation focused on your global research into academic libraries. We're also exploring the possibility of a follow-up conversation on Indigenous co-design and how cultural perspectives can inform library space planning. So if you're watching this video, watch this space. So at any rate, ngā mihi nui, thank you again for your time today.